Winner, winner, turkey dinner. We are at the final game here of our Thanksgiving triple header, and I'm Matt Donnelly, and this is your Thursday Night Football game previews. Now we are on to Minnesota as the New England Patriots take on the Minnesota Vikings. They don't ask how, they ask how many when it comes to victories in the NFL. And while the Patriots' 10-3 win over the Jets certainly wasn't pretty, it was their sixth victory of the season, which helped them leapfrog the Jets in the standings and put them in the playoff picture as the current sixth seed. A week after knocking out the Bills, the Vikings, well, let's say they were humbled somewhat there against a Dallas Cowboys pass rush that was relentless. Now, Minnesota, they dropped that contest 40-3, which dropped their record to 8-2 on the season. In a strange but true file, after that 37-point loss to the Cowboys, the Vikings have a negative 2-point differential in 2022. That is the lowest in the NFL history by any team to start a season at 8-2 or better within the first 10 games of the season. The previous low, if you will, was by the 1987 Chargers, who were +6. And guess what? They missed the playoffs that season. Now, we're not going to talk about missing the playoffs quite yet, but now we're going to get into the tail of the tape, starting with the New England Patriots and Mac Jones. Jones will be facing off against a defense that is reeling right now after surrendering 40 points last week and has been allowing the fifth most fantasy points over the last 4 weeks to opposing quarterbacks. After last week's victory against the Jets, Mac Jones improved his career record to 14-10, which sadly is the most wins by a quarterback from the 2021 draft class. In fact, it's the only winning record of all those quarterbacks. But if you look at Jones's first 7 games of his career and compare it to the last 7 games in which he's played, you have to wonder, has Mac Jones regressed? In those first 7 games to kickstart his career, he threw for 1,779 yards there and tossed 9 touchdowns. While the 7 games he's been under center this year, he has 7 interceptions, 4 touchdowns to go along with 1,386 yards. Before you start calling for Bailey Zappi there, again, keep in mind, Jones is still averaging more passing yards per game than Bailey Zappi did. Now, Minnesota, they have been allowing over 20 fantasy points per contest over this recent stretch, and the Patriots will be looking to kickstart this offense that had posted just 10 points the previous week. As for Kirk Cousins and this Minnesota Vikings team, after getting sacked 7 times last week, it doesn't get any easier facing Matthew Judon and his league-leading 13 sacks. Not to mention New England's defense, they've accumulated the second highest sack total this season with 36. The Patriots sack record, it belongs to a man named Andre Tippett, who back in 1984 finished the season with 18.5 sacks. It's not just the sack totals. In the last 4 weeks, the Patriots have only allowed 2 passing touchdowns while picking off 4 passes of their own to lead to the second fewest fantasy points surrendered against that position over that period of time. Now, Kirk Cousins, he was pressured on 60% of his dropbacks against the Cowboys, who also ranked first in pressure rate at 30.2%. The Patriots, they're right behind them at 29.8%. All good things must eventually come to an end, as did Kirk Cousins' streak of 40 consecutive games with a touchdown pass at the hands of that Dallas defense a week ago. Another piece of information from the Strange But True file, courtesy of Dustin Baker at DustBake on Twitter. Teams led by Kirk Cousins have weirdly never lost a Week 12 home game. His teams are 5-0 at home on week number 12. 2015, the Commanders over the Giants, 20-14. 2017, Commanders over the Giants once again, 20-10. 2018, Vikings, they beat the Packers 24-17. The Vikings again in 2019 over the Broncos 27-23. And then in 2020, the Vikings knocked off the Panthers 28-27. Now, turning our attention to the running backs here, Rhamondre Stevenson, Damian Harris. Are the Vikings living in some sort of weird loop there about Groundhog Day? Not only do they replace the Cowboys pass rush with the Patriots pass rush, that's the 2 top pass rushing teams in the league, they get to see another running back duo that can get the job done both on the ground and in the passing game. Now, Rhamondre Stevenson, he is basically a Tony Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott all rolled into one, having surpassed a 22% target share in each of the last 4 contests. In fact, since week number 7, his 24.8% target share, that ranks tops among the running back position, while he also sits 9th in fantasy points, averaging 18.8 per contest. Even with Damian Harris back last week, Stevenson saw a 75% of the snaps there and was credited with 65% of the carries to go along with 75% of the targets out of this Patriots backfield. Minnesota has allowed 179 receiving yards to backs over the last 4 weeks. But then again, 109 of them came courtesy of Tony Pollard there last week. They also allowed the Cowboys duo to run for a combined 122 yards and 4 scores, which accounts for 4 of the 6 touchdowns in which the Vikings they've allowed over the last 4 weeks. Now for the Vikings running back, Dalvin Cook. Well, Dalvin Cook couldn't cook up any touchdowns. He still managed 72 yards on 11 carries, which was really the only positive when it came to this Vikings offense a week ago. Cook, he may find the sledding out there tougher this week than the previous week, as the Patriots have allowed the second fewest fantasy points on average the last 4 weeks to opposing backs and the fewest over the course of the season. Now, New England to date has allowed just 1 rushing touchdown and 1 receiving touchdown this season to the running back position. It also gets even worse when you consider that Christian Darrisaw, and the Vikings starting left tackle, he's not going to be available for this contest due to a concussion. Now, for the pass catchers, Jakobi Meyers. Are y'all ready to admit that maybe I was right when it comes to Jakobi Meyers being a top receiving option in this New England offense? I wanted to give you some time to kind of let that sink in for a little bit there before putting many of you on blast, basically as you put me on blast for much of the offseason. Now, I did dig my heels in pretty deep when I planted that flag on top of Myers Mountain there in the offseason. But he has been a viable fantasy option this year, sitting 31st in total points among wide receivers there and averaging 14 per contest, which is actually the 21st. Now, this season, Myers, he is earning a 20% target share while accounting for 24.8% of the Patriots' air yards. His 44 receptions and 509 receiving yards leads the Patriots by quite a bit, actually. And the one thing he's got working for him that didn't quite fall into place last year is he has scored on 3 occasions on this campaign. Now, he needs some help here, and maybe help is finally on the way in Devontae Parker. Now, Myers, he played 60 of the Patriots' 63 offensive snaps last week, while Parker, in his return from that knee injury, he played in just 25 of those snaps. Now, New England, they need a secondary receiver to step up alongside with Myers if they have any hope to holding on to that final playoff positioning down the stretch. Only Myers and Stevenson have more than 40 receptions this season, with Parker's 17 tied with Nelson Aguilar as the second most among receivers this season in New England. Minnesota, they have not been able to limit production coming from receivers in fantasy this season, having allowed over 38.5 fantasy points per contest, which happens to be the 5th most. And over the last 4 weeks, that number has actually increased to an astonishing 44.45 per. Now, part of the reason for that jump over the last 4 weeks there, they've allowed 5 touchdowns and 802 receiving yards. Now, a receiver who doesn't really need any introduction, how about Justin Jefferson? Justin Jefferson hasn't really been handling the top competition there in the NFC East so far this season. After the Eagles held the All-Pro to less than 50 yards back in week number 2, Jefferson was held once again under 50 yards for just the 3rd time this season, courtesy of the Dallas Cowboys there and Trayvon Diggs, who contained him to 3 catches for 33 yards. In the last 19 games in which he has not played the Dallas Cowboys, Jefferson has averaged 7.1 receptions per game, 111 yards receiving. But in those last 2 games against the Dallas, who happens to have his number for whatever reason, he's been held to 5 receptions and just 54 yards. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how the Patriots adjust their coverage this week when facing Jefferson, Cousins, and this Vikings offense. Now, New England this season has primarily ran cover 1 and cover 3, and we all know that Kirk Cousins has historically had success against those coverages thanks to the success of Justin Jefferson. Now, Jefferson versus those coverage, he has a 31.5% target share there, a 4.79 yards per route run to go along with 44.9% of the air yard share. Now, Adam Thielen, he'd like to get in on some of that air yards, but it just hasn't kind of worked out for him so far. Now, chances are, if a team can limit an opposing quarterback's ability to produce for fantasy, chances are they do a pretty good job at limiting what wide receivers can do as well. You can find New England sitting near the top of that list here over the last 4 weeks, thanks to limiting opposing pass catchers to just 338 yards and a single score over that time. On the season, they are allowing 26.95 fantasy points per game, which is the 3rd stingiest mark. If we know that Bill Belichick loves to put extra attention on the top options there for offenses, then you can expect a little bit of extra attention to be paid to Justin Jefferson, which could open things up for Adam Thielen this week. Now, for the tight end position, Hunter Henry, Jonas Smith. The Vikings defense may appear to be a mess pretty much everywhere, but one area that they have been pretty decent at in recent weeks is defending the opposing tight ends, having limited in the fantasy production to about 8.5 fantasy points per game. We don't know if it's going to be a Hunter Henry week. We don't know if it's going to be a Jonas Smith week any given week right now, especially after Jonas Smith outperformed Hunter Henry just a week ago. And finally, TJ Hockenson, per our friend there, Jake Tribby there over at fantasypoints.com. In TJ Hockenson's last 3 games, 9 targets, 14.6 expected fantasy points, 10 targets, 19.7 expected fantasy points, 9 targets, 17.8 expected fantasy points. He's going to compete with Mark Andrews as the tight end 2 for the remainder of the season. That is per Jake Tribby there. So the Patriots, they've done an excellent job this season at taking away both running backs and wide receivers for fantasy purposes. But the one thing they haven't really been able to slow down or contain or stop is the tight ends from scoring, as they have allowed 7 touchdowns, which is the second most, and are allowing the 10th most fantasy points to the position on a per game basis this season. And if you're looking to score more like tight ends do against the New England Patriots, you have to head to fantasypoints.com. Use promo code 22Vipers10. That's going to get you 10% off that subscription, and that's going to help you win your league championships. And we will see you next time. Gobble, gobble.